Hello everyone and welcome to today's lesson, the second looking at Marxism and their views on crime and deviance. Today we're having a particular focus on what Marxists believe about the law and the role of the law and how they believe that it actually may cause crime and the role that the law plays in that. So first thing to have a look at, and it hopefully is a bit of a recap for you, is the work of Louis Althusser. So Althusser we looked at on education and we talked about the ideal state apparatus. The ideological state apparatus, and you can also use him on family if you feel so inclined. Althusser talked about how the state is able to keep the proletariat in order. So he's looking at how social order is created for Marxists. So we know that functionists believe that social order comes from value consensus and socialization. Althusser, he's looking at it from a much more Marxist point of view. He says that it happens in two different ways. The ideological state apparatus that we've talked about before involves all the institutions that manipulate our ideas and our views. So, for example, he believes that the education system, the family, the media, the religion are all geared up to indoctrinate us and socialize us into Marxist ways of thinking and put ruling class ideas into our heads, where we go out to work without realizing what we're doing, and that's called false class consciousness. Althusser also talked about the repressive state apparatus, and these are the institutions that force us to follow ruling class ideology. So it's not about persuading us, it's not about giving us ideas, it's about actively making us follow those rules, and that's things like the army, the police, the courts, etc. As such, Althusser argues that the whole repressive state apparatus is there to keep the proletariat in control. The laws exist just to serve the needs of the bourgeoisie. That's what they're there for. And all of the laws are geared up to supporting all of their ideas. So different to when we've looked at Althusser for education, but a really similar idea that the police, the courts are all created and made purely to keep the proletariat in order and to maintain ruling class ideology. Another really important idea for Marxists is the idea that laws are created themselves by the ruling classes, by the bourgeoisie, with their own interest in mind, to create a world that suits the way that they see and do things. So a recap: that functionists believe the job of laws and lawmakers is to create value consensus. So they believe that we have harmony and everything's awesome and lovely and all the laws do is remind us what we're supposed to do anyway. Marxists say, hang on a minute, these laws are created by the government to keep the proletariat in their place. If you look into some laws and the creation of laws, protection of property makes up a huge percentage of the laws that we have. So it shows what the focus is. It's protecting people's property, it's greed, it's self-interest, all those things we talked about last lesson that Marxists argue are inherent in capitalism, are enshrined in law. It's the way that the bourgeoisie create laws. And remember, laws are made by Parliament, made by the government and the House of Lords. It's absolutely the bourgeoisie who are doing this. And Marxists believe that they do this to protect their interests. On the flip side of that coin, Marxists argue that laws that protect workers' rights, so the roles of trade unions, that's groups of people who work together, come together to campaign for better rights and paying conditions, laws about the environment, laws about quality of products so that businesses can't sell you dangerous things or rubbish things for large amounts of money. Those laws are not very well administered. They're not really the focus of what the government are trying to do. They are way down the list on the priority order. And that's because the argument would be that the bourgeoisie are protecting their interests. A lot of them have, if you look at the government, they'll have family and friends and people they went to school with who are all owners of these big companies. And what they want is they want to help their mates out by keeping profits high and workers' rights low. On the right hand side of the slide, you can see some examples of where laws have been not used properly or laws have been broken by big companies with huge consequences. So if you are feeling so inclined, have a Google of some of these. So the Exxon Valdez oil spill is a really interesting one. Volkswagen emission scandal is a more recent example, and then the Bhopal disaster, the Union Carbide gas explosion. Those are all examples of how laws that are meant to control businesses and meant to control companies just aren't looked at, aren't used, they're not followed up when they're created, and therefore these big companies get away with an awful lot. The other thing that Marxists say is that the bourgeoisie also have control and decide which laws are enforced, which crimes are pursued, what's investigated, what's seen as a priority for government and the police. And overwhelmingly, time and money is spent on working class crime. So working class crimes such as burglary, theft, violence, fighting on the streets, things like that, are the most likely crimes to result in arrest and prosecution. So when we get to this section after the summer holidays where we're looking at social class and crime, you'll find that the majority of people in prisons are working class. But that doesn't necessarily mean that middle and upper class people don't commit crime. And Marxists argue that the police are intentionally focused by the government onto the working classes so that the middle and upper classes are left alone so that they are able to continue about their daily lives. An example would be fraud and benefit fraud. So where people claim benefits that they're not entitled to from the government is estimated to cost us about £2.3 billion a year, which is an awful lot of money, and nobody would agree that benefit fraud is acceptable. But it's much more likely to be prosecuted, investigated, have time and money spent on it than tax avoidance by the rich. So individuals and huge companies like Starbucks and Google have come under a lot of pressure for not paying enough taxes in the UK, and they use fancy accountants to get them out of paying the tax that they're supposed to pay. They send their money to offshore accounts and things like that. And I've seen estimates of at least £7 billion. I've seen one that was £70 billion, that tax that's avoided by the rich, that's how much we're missing out on. All the time and all the money is spent on working class crime and tackling that. And Marxists would say, well, that's not fair and that's not right, because if you're looking at a cost benefit analysis, we should be spending more time looking at crimes of the more powerful people because they're worth just an awful lot more. As a result, the criminal justice system in the UK is not a level playing field. It's not fair. Those in higher social classes are less likely to be arrested and prosecuted for offences. And if they are arrested, prosecuted and found guilty, if they get a punishment, they're treated more leniently. And Marxists call this selective law enforcement, that the bourgeoisie decide and set the agenda of what the police and what the government are going to investigate and how they're going to do it. The London 2011 riots are a good example. So some of the sentences that were handed out after the London riots, when you look at the value of these things, so an 18-year-old was imprisoned for 1 day for stealing 2 Burberry t-shirts. So let's think about the value of those t-shirts, and then let's think about how much it would have cost to put that 18-year-old through the courts, to process them into prison for the day, to have them looked after, and then all the stuff of dealing with that afterwards, probation, etc. A 23-year-old man was sentenced to 6 months in prison for stealing £3.50 worth of water. Anderson Fernandez, 22, was warned by a judge at Manchester Magistrates Court that he may face jail after he admitted stealing 2 scoops of ice cream. And mother of 2, Ursula Nevin from Manchester, was jailed for 5 months for receiving a pair of shorts given to her after they had been looted from a city centre store. So the government was scared by the London 2011 riots. So it was all about the shooting of an unarmed black man in London, and people very similar to the kinds of things we've seen in recent weeks in America, with the killing of George Floyd. People took to the streets to protest, and it ended up in rioting. And the rioting turned into looting. Now, looting is when people basically break into shops and houses and just take things that aren't theirs. And the government was scared of this. They wanted to stamp it out very quickly. And so these were some of the sentences that they passed down. Marxists would say that it's completely disproportionate, that working class people are being treated extremely harshly, and that the bourgeoisie are exploiting and abusing the power that they have to make these laws to protect their interests, because they're scared that they're going to lose their money and their power. Okay, task, really simple and straightforward. I'm trying to keep them short because I know that on some days you guys are back in school and you won't have as much time to get your work done. But 3 questions. 1, explain in your own words how Marxists believe the bourgeoisie use their ability to create laws to their own advantage. Number 2, explain how Marxists argue the law isn't always enforced fairly when it comes to social class. And number 3, do you agree with the Marxist view? And you can include the criminogenic bit from last lesson as well, and explain your opinion. And then one final bit of challenge. It's a tricky one, but I know you guys who like these challenges are up for it. So a bit more A-level stuff. Neo-Marxist perspective, so a branch of Marxism known as Neo-Marxism came up with what's called the new criminology, Taylor, Walton and Young, and they criticise the traditional Marxist view. They think it's too simplistic, and they try to give a bit more depth. So what I'd like you to do, read the textbook extract that I'm going to give you and answer those couple of questions there. Take care.